The ballroom shimmered with light and laughter, filled with the kind of people who never had to worry about tomorrow. Chandeliers sparkled above polished marble floors, and the air smelled of expensive perfume and freshly opened champagne. Waiters moved swiftly through the crowd, their trays glinting under the golden glow. In the center of it all stood a man everyone knew, Mr. Leonard Hale, a millionaire who made his fortune in real estate and loved to remind others of it. His smile was confident, his words sharp, and his pride even sharper. The evening was one of his grand charity galas, an annual event that drew politicians, business moguls, and celebrities who all pretended to care more than they did. The guests chatted about art, travel, and stocks while an orchestra played softly in the background. Near the edge of the room, a young girl named Eliza quietly carried a tray of juice glasses. Her clothes were too big for her small frame, her shoes worn, her hair tied back with a frayed ribbon. She didn't belong there, and she knew it. But she needed the few coins she would earn that night to buy food for herself and her little brother waiting outside the hall. Eliza had been working since the early morning, running errands for the catering team. No one really noticed her except to give orders. To them, she was invisible. She moved carefully between the guests, making sure not to bump into anyone or spill a drink. Every time she passed the grand piano at the far end of the room, her eyes lingered. The instrument was magnificent. White polished ivory keys and a golden frame that gleamed under the chandelier's light. For her, it wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was a dream. She had loved the piano since she was small. Her mother used to hum melodies to her when they still had a home. Those were simple tunes, but they filled Eliza's heart. After her mother's passing, music became her comfort. Sometimes she would sneak into an old music shop near the street corner, pressing random keys on a broken piano just to feel the sound. She didn't have lessons or books, but somehow melodies lived inside her. That night, as she passed near the grand piano again, she stopped for a moment. The seat was empty and no one seemed to be paying attention. Her fingers itched to touch those keys. Just one note, she thought. One sound to remember. But before she could take another step, a burst of laughter echoed through the hall. Mr. Hale had taken center stage again, standing proudly beside the piano. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called, raising his glass. "You've had your dinner, you've had your wine, now shall we have some music?" The crowd cheered lightly, clapping their hands. "Of course," he continued with a grin. "No party is complete without a little entertainment." A few guests called for a famous pianist who was among the crowd, but Mr. Hale waved them off. "Oh, not tonight. Tonight let's have some fun. Who among us dares to play?" He teased. No one volunteered. Most were too polite or too afraid to embarrass themselves in front of the millionaire. Then, half joking, he added, "What about our little staff? Maybe one of them can surprise us." His eyes scanned the room, and by chance they landed on Eliza, who froze in place, still holding her tray. "You?" he said, pointing with a smirk. "Yes, the girl with the tray." "Can you play, little one?" A soft murmur spread across the crowd. Eliza's cheeks burned. She wanted to disappear, but something in his tone, half mocking, half daring, made her lift her chin. "I can try, sir," she said in a small but steady voice. The guests chuckled. Some smiled kindly, others not so kindly. Mr. Hale raised an eyebrow, amused by her courage. "Try, you say?" "Very well," he said, pretending to think. "If you play something worth hearing, I'll adopt you myself." The room burst into laughter. A few people gasped, but no one believed he meant it. To them, it was just a joke, a way for the host to entertain them. Eliza's face turned pale, but she didn't look away. "All right," she whispered. "May I play, then?" Mr. Hale gestured toward the piano with a flourish. "Go on, little prodigy," he said mockingly. "The stage is yours." She placed her tray carefully on a nearby table, her hands trembling. Every eye in the room followed her as she walked toward the piano. The soft sound of her worn shoes against the marble floor seemed louder than the orchestra had been minutes before. When she reached the piano, she hesitated. The crowd's laughter faded into murmurs. Mr. Hale leaned back, expecting a clumsy attempt, something they could all chuckle at before returning to their drinks. But there was something different in the way she sat down. She didn't fidget. She didn't giggle. She simply took a deep breath and closed her eyes for a moment. The ballroom quieted. For the first time that night, even the air felt still. The soft rustle of dresses and the clinking of glasses stopped. Eliza placed her small hands on the keys, her fingers hovering like fragile wings. The light from the chandeliers reflected in her eyes. She didn't play immediately. She waited. listening to the silence around her as if she were trying to find something hidden inside it. Then she pressed one key, just one. The sound was pure, clear, and it echoed softly through the room. It wasn't much, but it made people turn their heads. Then another note followed, and soon a faint melody began to form. The guests stopped whispering. The tone in her music had something gentle but powerful, like a story told without words. Mr. Hale's smirk slowly faded. He hadn't expected her to know how to play at all, let alone with such feeling. Eliza didn't look at anyone. In her mind, she wasn't in the ballroom anymore. She was back in the tiny apartment where her mother used to hum songs while cooking. Back in the narrow alleys where she'd drawn notes in the dust because she couldn't afford paper. Each note she played carried a piece of her memory. As she played, her fear melted away. The laughter she had heard earlier disappeared from her thoughts. The only thing that mattered was the sound, the warmth of the piano beneath her fingers, the way the notes danced together, filling the room with something it had never heard before. The guests, many of whom had never experienced hardship, suddenly felt something they couldn't explain. A strange silence spread across the hall, a kind of awe that made their hearts tighten. Eliza's eyes stayed closed as she played a short, unfinished tune, one she had heard her mother hum countless nights. The melody rose and fell like a whisper from another world. When she stopped, the last note lingered in the air like a fading breath. For a long moment, no one moved. The sound of the piano still seemed to hang above them. Then someone clapped softly, followed by another, until the room filled with applause. Mr. Hale, who had started the night with laughter on his lips, stood speechless, his glass untouched. Eliza looked up, unsure of what she'd done. Her heart pounded, but she didn't smile. She simply stood, bowed politely, and turned to leave. She reached for her tray again, ready to return to work. But the crowd wasn't laughing anymore. They were whispering, asking each other how she had learned to play like that, who she was, and why no one had ever heard her before. Mr. Hale finally spoke, his voice quieter now. "Who taught you to play like that?" he asked. Eliza looked at him for a moment. "My mother," she said softly.
"She used to sing to me when I was little." Then she walked away, disappearing among the crowd,
leaving behind a silence that no amount of champagne or chatter could fill again. The night that had started with laughter ended with something entirely different. Curiosity, admiration, and a question that lingered in every guest's mind. Who was that girl, and what story was hidden in her music? Outside, as Eliza stepped into the cold night air, she looked up at the stars. She didn't know that her simple act had already changed something inside the man who had mocked her. She didn't know that her melody had awakened a memory long buried in his heart, but fate had already begun to move quietly between them, setting the stage for what would come next. And somewhere deep inside the golden-lit mansion, the echo of her music still played soft and haunting, like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. The night after the gala, Eliza could not sleep. She lay awake on the thin blanket she shared with her younger brother in a small corner of an abandoned building. The sound of the city echoed outside, cars passing, people laughing somewhere far away. But her mind was still in that ballroom. She could still feel the smooth keys of the piano beneath her fingers. She could still hear the soft clapping that had followed her playing. For a few minutes she had felt like she mattered, like the world had stopped to listen. Her brother stirred beside her. "Did they give you food tonight?" he asked sleepily. Eliza smiled faintly and gave him a small piece of bread she had saved from the catering table. "Eat it," she said. "I already had some." It wasn't true, but she didn't care. Watching him eat made her feel warm inside. She pulled her old jacket tighter around herself and looked up through the broken window at the sky. "Someday," she whispered, "I'll play again. For real." Meanwhile, in his large mansion across the city, Mr. Leonard Hale sat alone in his study. The laughter from the party was gone. The room was quiet except for the ticking of an old clock. He poured himself a glass of wine, but his mind wasn't on the drink. He kept thinking about the little girl and the melody she played. There was something strange about it, familiar. The tune had stayed in his head all night like a whisper from a dream he couldn't remember. He leaned back in his chair and stared at a photo on his desk. It was a picture of his late wife, Eleanor. She had been a gifted pianist, known for her gentle spirit and her love for teaching poor children music for free. She had died years ago, leaving behind a silence that he had never been able to fill. Her favorite piano still sat untouched in the music room downstairs. He remembered the song Eliza played. The notes. The rhythm. It was almost the same as a piece Eleanor used to work on. A melody she had never finished. Only he had ever heard it. No one else in the world knew that song. He rubbed his forehead, confused. How could she know? He murmured. The next morning, Eliza went to the catering shop to ask if she could help again. The owner, a kind older woman named Mrs. Lang, smiled when she saw her. "You did good last night," she said. "Everyone's talking about the little girl who played the piano. You made quite an impression." Eliza's cheeks turned pink. "They were laughing at first," she said quietly. Mrs. Lang waved a hand. "Let them laugh. You showed them who you are. That's what matters." She handed Eliza a small paper bag with leftover food. "Here, for you and your brother." Eliza thanked her and was about to leave when a black car pulled up outside. The door opened and a man in a dark suit stepped out. He looked serious and professional. "Are you Eliza?" he asked. She froze, unsure if she should answer. "Yes, sir," she said finally. The man nodded. "Mr. Hale wants to see you." The words hit her like a shock. "The man from last night?" "Yes," the driver said. "He sent me to bring you to his house." Mrs. Lang frowned, wiping her hands on her apron. "She's just a child. What does he want with her?" The driver shook his head. "I don't know, ma'am. He only said it's important." Eliza hesitated. Part of her wanted to run. Another part wanted to see that grand piano again. "It's all right," she said softly to Mrs. Lang. "I'll go." The ride to Mr. Hale's mansion felt like a dream. Eliza sat quietly, clutching the bag of food in her lap. The car moved through streets she had never seen before, wide, clean, lined with trees and shining buildings. When they arrived, the gates opened automatically and the car rolled into a long driveway. The mansion was even more beautiful than she remembered. The same place where she had been mocked, the same place where she had played. The driver opened her door and led her up the marble steps. She felt small standing in front of the giant doors. When they opened, Mr. Hale was there, dressed in a suit but without the arrogance he had worn the night before. He looked tired, almost nervous. "Come in," he said, his voice softer than she expected. Eliza stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and flowers. Everything shone. He led her through a long hallway to the music room, the one that held the white piano. Sunlight spilled through tall windows, making the keys gleam. "Do you know why I asked you here?" he asked. Eliza shook her head. "No, sir." He studied her for a moment. "That song you played last night, where did you learn it?" She looked down at her hands. "My mother used to hum it when I was little," she said. "I learned it by ear." She said she learned it from a woman she worked for. A kind woman who loved music. Mr. Hale's breath caught. "Did your mother ever tell you that woman's name?" "She said her name was Eleanor," Eliza replied softly. "Eleanor Hale." The room fell silent. Mr. Hale's face went pale. He turned toward the window, his hand trembling slightly. Memories flooded back. His wife laughing, playing that very song. Teaching a small group of children in the slums, one of them perhaps Eliza's mother. He whispered her name, barely audible. "Eleanor?" Eliza watched him quietly. "Was she someone you knew?" she asked. He turned to her, eyes glistening. "She was my wife," he said. "She passed away years ago." Eliza's mouth opened slightly. "My mother said she was the kindest person she ever met," she said. She said Mrs. Hale gave her food, clothes, and taught her to play music. She never forgot her. Mr. Hale sat down slowly at the piano bench. "Eleanor always wanted to help others," he murmured. "I didn't understand her work back then. I thought it was a waste of time. I was too busy making money, too proud to see what truly mattered." He pressed one of the keys softly and the note rang clear. "That melody," he said, "was something she was composing before she died. She called it A Song for Tomorrow. She said she wanted to finish it one day, but she never got the chance." Eliza's eyes brightened. "My mother said the same name," she said quickly. "She said it was called A Song for Tomorrow. She used to hum it when she missed Mrs. Hale." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sunlight made the piano glow like it held a memory inside it. Then Mr. Hale looked at her again. "You played it exactly the way she used to," he said quietly. "No one else could have done that." Eliza shifted on her feet. "I'm sorry if I caused trouble last night," she said. I didn't mean to embarrass anyone, he shook his head. No, child. You didn't embarrass anyone. You reminded me of something I had forgotten, a piece of my heart. There was a pause. Then he said gently, Would you play it again for me? Eliza hesitated, then nodded. She sat at the piano, her small fingers resting on the keys. The room filled with light again as she began to play. This time it was not a performance, it was a reunion. Every note seemed to bring back the spirit of the woman they both missed. Mr. Hale listened in silence, tears gathering in his eyes. When she finished, he stood and placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. You have a gift, he said softly, and I made a fool of myself last night by mocking it. I owe you an apology. Eliza looked up at him, unsure how to respond. It's all right, sir, she said. People laugh at me all the time. He shook his head. They won't anymore. He walked to the window, thinking for a long time before speaking again. You said you live with your brother? Yes, sir, she said. We don't have a real home. I just work when I can. Mr. Hale turned to her. You shouldn't have to live like that. Not with your talent. He took a deep breath. You played a song that connected us both to someone we loved. I made a promise in front of everyone last night. A foolish promise, perhaps, but one I intend to keep. Eliza blinked, not sure she heard him right. Keep, he nodded slowly. If you're willing, I'd like you to come live here. Learn music properly. Go to school. You and your brother both. You'll never go hungry again. Tears welled up in her eyes. You mean, you'd really let us stay? I would more than that, he said, his voice gentle. I'll be the father you should have had. Eliza pressed her hands to her mouth, unable to speak. That morning, when the sun rose higher and the piano's last note faded into the air, two lives quietly changed forever, the proud man who rediscovered his heart, and the little girl whose music had finally. The morning sunlight poured gently through the tall windows of the mansion, filling the room with warmth and quiet calm. The air smelled faintly of fresh bread and roses from the garden outside. For the first time in many years, the big house felt alive again. In one of the upstairs rooms, Eliza and her little brother, Tom, sat at the breakfast table staring wide-eyed at the plates in front of them. Warm eggs, toast, butter, and milk. Tom's small hands trembled as he picked up a slice of bread. Is all this for us? He asked, his voice uncertain as if he didn't quite believe it. Eliza smiled softly. Yes, she said. It's for us. She watched him eat, her heart both light and heavy. Light because her brother finally had a full meal. Heavy because she still couldn't believe how quickly their lives had changed. Just days ago, they were sleeping in a cold corner of an abandoned building, wrapping themselves in torn blankets to survive the night. And now they were sitting in a beautiful house, cared for by a man who not long ago had laughed at her. When Mr. Hale entered the dining room, both of them stood up quickly, unsure of what to do. He smiled faintly, waving his hand. No need for that, he said. Sit. Eat. His tone was gentle now, far from the proud, mocking man she had met at the gala. He watched the two children eat, his expression soft but thoughtful. Every time he looked at Eliza, he was reminded of his late wife. The way she sat at the piano, the way her fingers moved, even the light in her eyes. It all carried a part of Eleanor he thought he had lost forever. After breakfast, he led Eliza to the music room. The piano gleamed under the morning light as if waiting for her. From now on, he said, you'll practice here every day. I've already spoken to a teacher who will help you. Eliza looked up, surprised. A teacher? You mean a real piano teacher? He nodded. Yes, I want you to learn properly. You have something special and it shouldn't be wasted. Her eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. Thank you, sir, she said quietly. He smiled faintly. You can call me Leonard, he said, or, if it's easier, you may call me Uncle Leonard. The words made her heart tighten. It was the first time in years anyone had offered her something that felt like family. When the teacher arrived later that week, Eliza was nervous. She worried she might not be good enough, that once people realized she couldn't read sheet music, they would send her away. But the teacher, an older woman with kind eyes, listened to her play and simply said, Child, you play with your heart. Notes can be learned. Feelings cannot. From that day on, Eliza practiced every morning and evening. The sound of music filled the mansion again, running through the halls, touching even the quiet corners that had once held only silence. The servants often stopped their work just to listen. Even Tom would sit near the piano, resting his chin on his knees, watching proudly as his sister's fingers danced over the keys. Leonard would sometimes stand in the doorway, saying nothing. He didn't want to interrupt her. He would just listen, remembering his wife's laughter, her voice, her joy when she taught music to children who couldn't afford it. For the first time since her passing, the sound of the piano didn't hurt him. It healed him. But outside the mansion, whispers began to spread. Some of Leonard's wealthy friends didn't understand his decision. They couldn't believe that a powerful man had taken in two poor street children. At his next social gathering, one of them asked bluntly, "Leonard, have you lost your mind? You took in a servant girl and her brother? People are talking, you know." Leonard simply replied, "Let them talk." Another man laughed. "You can't be serious about raising her. She's not from our world." Leonard's calm eyes met theirs. "Music has no world," he said. "It belongs to anyone who can feel it." That silenced them, at least for the moment. Back at the mansion, Eliza didn't know about those conversations. She was busy practicing. But one afternoon, she overheard a group of visitors whispering near the garden. "She's the girl from the street," one of them said. "He found her at a party, can you imagine? What does he think he's doing?" "She doesn't belong here," another voice added. The words stung her heart. She quietly stepped back, hiding behind a pillar, holding back tears. She thought she had finally found a place where she belonged. But hearing those words made her doubt everything again. That evening, she played the piano differently. The notes were sad, heavy, full of something she couldn't put into words. Leonard noticed immediately. He sat beside her and asked softly, "What's wrong, Eliza?" She shook her head, her voice trembling. "Maybe they're right," she said. "Maybe I don't belong here." Leonard looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "You belong wherever your heart leads you. You have a gift that connects you to people, even those who don't understand it yet." She looked up, her eyes red. "But I'm not like them. I don't have nice clothes. I don't know how to talk like they do. I don't even belong at their table." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "When I was your age," he said, "I was poor too. I hid it, I worked hard, and I built my life brick by brick. But I forgot something along the way. I forgot kindness. You reminded me of that." Eliza blinked, surprised. "I did?" He nodded. "You reminded me of what my wife believed in, helping others, seeing beauty in places others ignore. You belong here because you brought that back into this house." Her tears finally fell, but she smiled through them. "I'll try my best," she whispered. Days turned into weeks, and Eliza's playing grew stronger. Her teacher often said she doesn't play notes, she tells stories. Tom also began to learn small pieces, sitting beside her and laughing when he hit the wrong keys. Their laughter filled the halls like sunlight. One afternoon, Leonard received a letter from the city's music academy. The letter invited him to attend their annual student concert, where young pianists would perform. Without telling Eliza, he decided to enter her name. He wanted her to show the world what he already knew, that her gift was something rare and real. When he finally told her, Eliza's eyes went wide. "A concert, me? But I've never played for strangers before." He smiled. "You played for hundreds of strangers at that gala, remember? And you made them silent," she laughed nervously. "But that was different." "It wasn't," he said gently. "You played from your heart. That's all you need to do again." The days leading to the concert were full of practice. Sometimes she would stay up late, repeating the same passage until it sounded perfect. Her fingers grew sore, but she didn't complain. When she grew tired, Tom would sit nearby and tell her, "You're going to make them listen again just like before." On the day of the concert, the grand hall was filled with people, musicians, students, and wealthy guests. Eliza wore a simple white dress that Leonard's housekeeper had sewn for her. It wasn't fancy, but it made her look like she belonged on that stage. When it was her turn, she walked out slowly, her heart pounding. She looked out at the sea of faces and then spotted Leonard in the front row, smiling proudly. That gave her courage. She sat at the piano and closed her eyes. The lights dimmed slightly and the first note rang out, a soft, clear sound that filled the hall. The melody she chose was the same one she had played at the gala, but now it was richer, fuller, carrying all the new emotions she had learned since that night: hope, loss, belonging, and love. As she played, people stopped whispering. The audience leaned forward, drawn into her world. Every note told a story, the story of a little girl who had once been laughed at, who found kindness where she least expected it, who turned pain into something beautiful. When the last note faded, the hall was completely silent. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then came the applause, loud, endless, rising like a wave. Leonard's eyes glistened with tears. Eliza stood, bowed shyly, and looked toward him. He nodded, smiling proudly. That night, when they returned home, she sat once again at the white piano. "I think she would have been proud," Leonard said quietly, looking toward the framed picture of his wife. Eliza smiled. "I hope so." The music room felt peaceful again. The house, once filled with emptiness, now carried laughter, warmth, and the soft echo of dreams that had finally found their way home. The days after the concert felt like a dream that Eliza didn't want to end. Every newspaper in the city carried her name, the street girl who stunned the hall. People who had laughed at her months ago now spoke her name with admiration. Reporters wrote about her story, her music, and how a little girl with no training had made an entire audience rise to their feet. But inside the mansion, things remained simple. Eliza still practiced every morning. She still helped the servants when she could, and she still shared bedtime stories with her younger brother. Fame didn't change her heart. It only made her more grateful. Leonard, however, couldn't help but feel proud. He had watched her grow from a shy, hungry child into a confident musician who could move people with every note she played. Her performance had touched something deep within him, and for the first time in many years he felt that his house was full of life again. He began hosting small gatherings where Eliza would play, not to impress but to bring people together. The laughter, the applause, and the music brought light to the walls that had once felt cold. But fame, even the gentle kind, brings curiosity. Journalists started asking questions about where Eliza came from, who her parents were, and why a millionaire had taken her in. Leonard refused most interviews, saying her story was private. But rumors started to swirl among his wealthy circle. Some said he adopted her out of guilt. Others whispered that she might be the child of someone from his past. He ignored the gossip, but the whispers always find a way to travel. One afternoon, while Eliza practiced in the music room, the butler came in and handed her a small envelope. "This came for you, miss," he said politely. The paper looked old and the handwriting was uneven. Inside was a short note. "I knew your mother. I have something that belonged to her. Meet me at the old music shop at noon." Eliza's heart skipped a beat. The shop's name was familiar. It was the same place where she used to sneak in as a child to touch the broken piano keys. She folded the letter carefully, unsure what to do. She didn't want to worry Leonard, but curiosity tugged at her. What if it was true? What if there was something of her mother's waiting for her? The next day, she told Leonard that she wanted to visit the city to buy some new sheet music. He smiled and gave her permission, offering the car and driver, but she gently refused. "I'd like to walk," she said. "I miss the streets." When she reached the old music shop, memories flooded back, the dusty windows, the cracked wooden door, the faint smell of varnish and old strings. Inside, it was quiet except for the soft creak of the floorboards. An elderly man stood behind the counter polishing a violin. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes were kind. "You must be Eliza," he said with a warm smile. "I knew your mother very well. She used to come here every week." Eliza's eyes widened. "You knew her?" "Yes," he said softly. "She was a sweet woman. Always talking about her little girl. She told me she wanted to teach you music one day. Before she fell sick, she left something here for you." He reached under the counter and pulled out a small wooden box. The edges were worn, but it was carefully wrapped in a faded red ribbon. Eliza took it in her hands and opened it slowly. Inside was a folded piece of sheet music, yellow with age. Across the top, written in her mother's handwriting, were the words, "A Song for Tomorrow." Her breath caught. It was the same title she had heard both her mother and Mrs. Hale mention. The same melody that had connected her and Leonard. "She wanted you to have this when you were ready," the old man said gently. "I think now you are." Eliza thanked him with tears in her eyes and hurried back home, clutching the box tightly. When she arrived, Leonard was in his study. She ran to him, her face glowing. "I found something," she said breathlessly. "Something from my mother." He looked up, surprised, and she handed him the sheet music. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakable. "It's her," he whispered. "Eleanor's composition. But look, there are new notes added." Eliza nodded. "My mother must have finished it after Mrs. Hale passed away." They both sat at the piano, the paper spread before them. Eliza began to play the first few notes, and Leonard joined her by softly humming the melody. It was like two lives, two stories, finally meeting in harmony. The unfinished song that had once been left behind was now whole. When the final note faded, neither spoke. There was no need. The room was filled with a silence so deep it felt sacred. After a long pause, Leonard whispered, "She must have known we'd meet one day. That you would bring her song home." Eliza smiled through her tears. "I think she did." In the days that followed, they worked together to prepare the piece for a public performance. Leonard wanted the world to hear it, the complete version of the melody that had once belonged to both their pasts. He arranged for a special event at the same grand hall where Eliza had first stunned the audience. This time it wasn't just about her talent. It was about love, loss, and the power of music to connect people across time. The night of the concert came. The hall was filled again, brighter than ever. Eliza wore a simple pale blue dress that matched the color of the sky before sunrise. Tom sat proudly in the front row, swinging his legs, his face beaming with excitement. Leonard stood beside the stage, his heart heavy with emotion. When Eliza walked out, the crowd went silent. She sat at the piano, the same one from the Hale mansion, brought there for this special night. On the music stand lay the old sheet, carefully restored. The first notes filled the room, soft, delicate, full of memories. As she played, the melody told a story of a woman who had taught music to strangers, of a mother who had hummed songs to her daughter at night, of a man who had lost his kindness and found it again through a child's heart. The audience didn't just hear the song, they felt it. Every note carried love, grief, and hope. In the middle of the piece, Eliza paused for just a moment. She looked up and saw Leonard watching her. His eyes were wet, but he smiled proudly, nodding for her to continue. She took a deep breath and began the second half, the part her mother had added. It was brighter, more hopeful. The notes rose like sunlight breaking through clouds. When the final chord rang out, there was silence. Then the applause came, strong, endless, echoing through the hall like thunder. People stood clapping and cheering. Some were crying. Even those who didn't know the full story could feel that something rare had happened. Leonard walked up to the stage and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "Your mother would be proud," he whispered. Eliza smiled, her eyes glistening. "She's here," she said softly, touching her heart. "In every note." After the concert, as they walked out into the cool night air, Leonard looked up at the stars and said quietly, "I used to think money could buy happiness, but tonight I learned it can't buy peace. You and your music gave that back to me." Eliza looked up too. "You gave me something too," she said, "a home, a family." He smiled, and for the first time in years, it wasn't a proud, distant smile. It was warm, real, and full of gratitude. That night, when they returned to the mansion, the white piano stood waiting. Eliza placed the old sheet music on top of it. She didn't play again that evening. She simply sat beside Leonard and listened to the wind outside the window. The melody of a song for tomorrow lingered in the air, soft and endless, like a promise that love never truly fades. It just changes its tune until it finds its way home again. The days after the concert brought a peace that Eliza had never known before. The mansion no longer felt cold or distant. It was alive with laughter, music, and a quiet sense of purpose. Leonard spent more time downstairs, joining Eliza and her brother for meals, listening to her play in the evenings, or simply sitting with a book nearby while she practiced. The piano had once been a reminder of his loneliness, but now it was a symbol of the life that had come back into his home. Every morning, sunlight streamed into the music room and Eliza would start her day at the piano. Sometimes she played her mother's song, and other times she wrote her own melodies, soft, hopeful pieces inspired by the people around her. Leonard often paused by the door to listen before continuing his day. He never interrupted her. Watching her play reminded him that beauty often came from struggle. But beneath all the happiness, something stirred inside him. He often thought about the years he had wasted chasing wealth and recognition. He had built an empire of steel and glass, but forgotten what really mattered. Now, hearing Eliza play, he began to see things differently. Her kindness, her humility, and her love for music taught him more than any business lesson ever could. One morning, Leonard sat at his desk staring at an old framed photo, a picture of his late wife Eleanor sitting at a piano smiling. He hadn't touched that frame in years, but now he picked it up gently, running a hand across the glass. "You'd be proud of her," he whispered. Our world is full again because of her music. That same afternoon, Eliza came into the study, holding a notebook filled with handwritten songs. "I've been working on something," she said shyly. "I call it the gift of the heart. I want to perform it for the children at the orphanage this weekend. They don't have music classes, but I think it could make them happy." Leonard's eyes softened. "You want to go back?" She nodded. "Yes, I used to be one of them. I know what it's like to feel forgotten. Maybe if they hear the music, they'll know someone cares." He smiled faintly. "You have a heart bigger than most people I know, Eliza." She looked down, blushing. "It's not big," she said softly. "It's just not empty anymore." The following Saturday, they traveled to the orphanage in the city. It was the same place where Leonard had first met her, the cold gray building where laughter had once been rare. But this time things were different. The moment Eliza stepped out of the car, children ran to greet her. They remembered her, the girl who used to hum songs while sweeping the floors. Inside the small hall, a piano had been set up. It was old, but she didn't mind. She brushed her fingers over the keys, smiled at the children, and began to play. The melody was light and full of life, like sunlight dancing on water. The children listened quietly at first, then started tapping their feet, clapping their hands, and even humming along. When she finished, the room filled with cheers. One little boy tugged on her sleeve and whispered, "Will you teach me?" She nodded without hesitation. For the next hour, she showed him how to place his fingers on the keys, how to press softly and listen carefully. The boy's eyes shone with joy. Leonard watched from the back, his heart swelling with pride. He had attended countless concerts in his life, but none had touched him like this simple performance. It wasn't about fame or applause, it was about love. He realized then that Eliza's true gift wasn't her talent alone. It was her ability to give people hope. After the performance, the head of the orphanage approached Leonard. "You've changed her life," she said kindly. He shook his head. "No," he replied. "She changed mine." As they drove back, Eliza looked out the window, her notebook resting on her lap. "I want to start something," she said suddenly. "A place where children can learn music for free. Somewhere they can play, sing, and create, just like I do now. Maybe we can call it Tomorrow's Song after my mother's melody." Leonard was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he smiled. "Let's make it happen." True to his word, the project began within weeks. Leonard used part of his fortune to buy an old theater building in the city. The place had been abandoned for years, its walls cracked and its roof leaking, but Eliza saw beauty in it. Together they restored it, painting the walls white and gold, adding pianos, violins, and guitars. She invited teachers, musicians, and volunteers to help, and soon, the once silent building was filled with music and laughter. The first day the academy opened, dozens of children arrived. Some were shy, others curious. Eliza welcomed each one personally, remembering what it felt like to walk into a room and feel unseen. She guided them gently, teaching them how to listen, to music and to their own hearts. Leonard often came to visit, sitting in the back as children practiced. He loved hearing the uneven, clumsy sounds turning into harmony. He especially loved watching Eliza move among them, encouraging, smiling, patient with every mistake. She had found her purpose. One evening, after the lessons were done, Eliza sat alone at the piano, softly playing her mother's song. Leonard joined her quietly. "You've done something incredible," he said. She smiled. "We did it." He shook his head. "No, you brought the dream to life. I only followed your lead." For a moment, they both sat in silence, the melody floating in the air. Then Leonard said, "You know, I've been thinking about something. I don't just want to support this place, I want it to be your legacy. You've given me back my heart, Eliza. Now I want to give you something in return." She looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" He took a small envelope from his coat pocket and handed it to her. Inside was a document, a legal paper naming her as his adopted daughter and co-owner of the new academy. Eliza's eyes widened in shock. I don't know what to say." He smiled softly. "You don't have to say anything. You've already proven you belong here. You gave me a family again." Tears welled up in her eyes. "You already gave me one," she whispered. That night, when she returned to her room, Eliza sat by the window and looked up at the stars. She thought of her mother, of the nights they had spent huddled under a thin blanket, her mother humming softly to keep her calm. "We made it," she whispered to the sky. Your song reached the world. The weeks that followed were filled with joy. The academy thrived. Children from poor neighborhoods came every day to learn. Local newspapers covered the story of the millionaire and the girl who had turned her life into music. Donations poured in, and musicians from across the city volunteered to teach. But amidst all the happiness, Leonard's health began to decline. He had grown older, and the years of stress and loneliness had taken a toll. He tried to hide it, but Eliza noticed. His steps had slowed. His hands trembled slightly, and sometimes he would pause mid-sentence as if catching his breath. One evening, as she finished teaching, she found him sitting alone in the academy's courtyard. The sun was setting, painting the sky in gold and rose. She sat beside him quietly. "Beautiful evening," he said softly. "It is," she agreed. "Do you remember the first time you heard me play?" He chuckled weakly. "How could I forget? I thought you were a little fool trying to prove something. But you proved me wrong that day." Eliza smiled sadly. "You gave me a chance when no one else did. You gave me life again," he said gently. "Promise me you'll keep this place alive no matter what happens. Promise me you'll never stop playing." She looked at him, her throat tightening. "I promise." He reached out and held her hand. "Good, because your music is the world's light now." The last rays of the sun faded behind the buildings. For a while they sat in silence, listening to the faint sound of children laughing somewhere inside the academy. Eliza squeezed his hand gently, feeling both gratitude and fear in her heart. That night, as she played softly at the piano in the quiet hall, Leonard watched her one last time from the doorway. His eyes were tired, but they were full of peace. The same melody that had once healed his soul now carried him into rest, and as Eliza's fingers danced across the keys, she didn't yet realize that her music had already become more than a song. It was a promise, a bond between hearts and a story that would never truly end. The morning sun rose gently over the city, casting a golden light across the academy's windows. Inside, the halls were quiet except for the faint sound of a piano playing softly. Eliza sat alone, her fingers moving slowly across the keys. The tune she played was one she had written recently, a song of peace, of gratitude, and of love that never fades. Each note seemed to echo through her heart, filling the empty spaces that had begun to ache since Leonard's passing. It had been 2 months since that night when he quietly slipped away. The house had felt heavy with silence for days after. The servants moved softly, speaking in whispers, and even the piano seemed unwilling to be touched. For a long time, Eliza couldn't bring herself to play. Every melody reminded her of him. His gentle smile, his proud eyes, his words about finding light again through music. But slowly she realized he wouldn't have wanted silence. Leonard had believed in sound, in creation, in moving forward. So she returned to the piano, letting her grief melt into every note. Now as she played, the memories came like waves. She remembered the first time she had entered his mansion, frightened and hungry, and how her fingers had trembled when she touched the white piano. She remembered his cold stare, his disbelief, and how everything changed the moment her music filled the room. He had mocked her once, but he had also given her the chance to prove herself, and more than that, he had given her a home. The Academy, now renamed the Hale Foundation for Music and Hope, stood as his legacy. Every wall held a story. Children filled the classrooms each day, learning not just to play instruments but to find courage and joy in themselves. Eliza had turned Leonard's dream into something living, something that reached far beyond the city. People from across the country visited, offering to help, to teach, to listen. The once abandoned theater now glowed with laughter, footsteps, and songs. One afternoon, as Eliza walked through the courtyard, she saw a small boy sitting alone on a bench, his head bowed. He looked about 10 years old, his clothes a little worn, his eyes filled with worry. She walked over and knelt in front of him. "Hey," she said softly, "why are you sitting here by yourself? Don't you have class today?" He looked up, startled. I tried, but I can't do it. "I can't play right," she smiled kindly. "No one plays right in the beginning. That's how you learn." He shook his head. "I don't think I can ever be good. Everyone's better than me." Eliza took his small hands and placed them gently on her own. "You know," she said, "someone once told me the same thing. A man who thought I couldn't play because I was just a poor girl. But I played anyway, because I believed the music inside me mattered more than what anyone thought." The boy looked up, curious. "What happened then?" She smiled softly. "He listened, and that day changed both our lives." The boy blinked. Really? Really, she said. Now how about we go inside and try again? They walked together into the music hall. She sat beside him at the piano, guiding his fingers across the keys, teaching him to find rhythm and patience. Slowly, the hesitant notes began to form a small tune. When he finished, he grinned shyly. It sounds better now, he whispered. Eliza smiled. It always does when you believe in yourself. Moments like these gave her strength. Each child she helped reminded her why she kept going. Every laugh, every song, every hesitant smile, it all carried a piece of Leonard's legacy and her mother's dream. She was no longer the girl who begged for food in the cold streets. She was the woman who brought warmth to others through music. Weeks passed and the academy continued to grow. One evening, a letter arrived from the city council. They wanted to honor Eliza and the academy for their contribution to the community. They planned a grand event to celebrate the foundation's success and the late Leonard Hale's memory. When Eliza read the letter, she felt a mix of pride and sadness.
He should have been here to see this, she whispered.
But deep down she knew he already was, somewhere beyond, watching proudly, smiling at what his once cold mansion had become. The night of the ceremony arrived. The hall was filled with guests, students, teachers, local leaders, and people who had followed Eliza's story for years. The stage was decorated with flowers, and at the center stood the same piano that had once sat in Leonard's grand living room. It had been carefully moved there, polished until it gleamed under the lights. As Eliza walked onto the stage, the room fell silent. She wore a simple white dress, her hair tied back, her eyes calm but full of emotion. She began to speak, her voice soft yet steady. This piano, she said, resting her hand on it, was once played by a man who had everything money could buy, but still felt empty. When I first met him, I had nothing, no home, no family, no hope. Music brought us together. It taught us both that the greatest gift isn't wealth or fame, but the chance to touch another person's heart. She paused, looking at the audience. Leonard Hale believed in me when I had nothing to give. He saw something in me that I didn't see myself. And because of that, I found my purpose. This academy isn't just mine, it's his dream, my mother's dream, and the dream of every child who ever thought they weren't enough. The audience listened in silence, moved by her words. Then she turned to the piano and began to play a song for tomorrow. The hall filled with the familiar, tender melody, the same song that had once silenced a crowd and changed two lives forever. But this time it sounded different. It was fuller, richer, touched by years of love, loss, and growth. As she played, images of the past filled her mind. Her mother's gentle smile, Leonard's proud eyes, the laughter of the children at the academy. The notes flowed like a story, carrying everything she had ever felt: sorrow, gratitude, and hope. When the final note faded, the audience rose to their feet, clapping with tears in their eyes. Eliza stood slowly, her heart full. She didn't bow. Instead, she placed a hand over her chest and looked upward. "Thank you," she whispered, as if speaking to both her mother and Leonard. After the ceremony, as the guests mingled, an old man approached her. He was one of Leonard's former business partners, someone she barely knew. "He was right about you," the man said with a small smile. "He told me once that you'd change the world with your heart." I didn't believe him then, but I do now. Eliza smiled, her eyes shining. He changed it first. I just followed his path. That night she returned to the mansion. It felt peaceful, no longer lonely. The same stars that had once watched over her from the streets now shone above her home. She walked into the music room, sat at the white piano, and began to play once more. Her brother, now older and taller, came in quietly and stood beside her. "You never get tired of playing," he said, smiling. She laughed softly. "How could I? It's like breathing." He sat next to her and pressed a few keys. "Do you ever think about when we were out there? Before all this?" She nodded. "Every day. It reminds me how far we've come, and how music saved us." He leaned his head on her shoulder. "I think he'd be proud of you." "I hope so," she whispered. The song she played that night wasn't one from her mother's notebook or Leonard's collection. It was something new, something she had written from her own soul. It began softly, full of warmth and memories, and then grew brighter, carrying the promise of tomorrow. Outside, the moonlight touched the piano keys, making them shimmer like silver. The wind moved through the open window, blending with the melody, and somewhere in that quiet it felt as if Leonard's voice whispered through the air, gentle, calm, and full of love. Keep playing, Eliza. The world needs your song. She closed her eyes, smiling through her tears, and let the melody flow. The music filled the house, carrying with it the story of a young girl who had once been laughed at, a man who had once been lost, and the bond they created through the language of the heart. And though the night grew long and the stars shifted slowly across the sky, the piano never fell silent. It sang of hope, kindness, and second chances, a melody that would live forever, reminding the world that sometimes the most beautiful songs are born from the quietest beginnings.